The field theory of happiness is big. I mean, it's like we have a whole semester for this conversation, right? And everybody gets credit, by the way. So Harvard credit. No, anyway, the point is basically that what we need to understand is that first, let's start with unhappiness. The biggest mistake that people say is that I want to be happy, but I can't be until I get rid of the source of unhappiness in my life. There's actually two huge errors embedded in that. Number one is you can't be happy. You can be happier. Happiness is a direction. It's not a destination. You can't get there. It's like El Dorado, the city of gold in South America that countless Spaniards lost their life trying to find, right? It's not a destination. It's really a direction. The second is this idea that until I get rid of the source of my unhappiness, I can't get happier. And so a lot of people, they look for a diagnosis for their unhappiness, childhood trauma, whatever it happens to be. But the truth of the matter is, man, we're all a mess. We're all depressed. We're all anxious. We all have ADHD. But why? I'm not saying that everybody has like some sort of clinical definition of this. What I'm saying is that these are dials, not switches. This urge to diagnose everything. You have depression or you don't have depression. No, the question is how much depression you have in your life, and is it getting above the line where it's interfering with your life? That's where knowledge comes in, to know yourself deeply, and then to understand where you need to get help, what kind of help you need to get, and how much the knowledge, which will help you to change your own behavior, can work for you. So it's entirely consistent with, entirely complementary with any kind of therapy that you might be getting outside, as opposed to just saying, yeah, I'm broken because I'm suffering, so go to the doctor and say, fix me. It's just not very effective, as it turns out. So that's the basic field theory of unhappiness. Now, the question is, what's happiness? And by the way, happiness and unhappiness are not opposites. They're processed in different hemispheres of the brain. This is incredibly important to keep in mind, because most people think that, again, if I'm happier, it means I'm less unhappy. Wrong. You can be both a very happy person and a very unhappy person simultaneously. It means you're a high affect person. I have tests that I administer to my students about this. And personally, I'm both very high happiness and very high unhappiness. It took me a long time to actually figure out the science behind that and to write about it in a way that people can understand it. But then once I actually have that, then I have to say, well, what is happiness? And it's not a feeling. That's what I got wrong for years. It's not a feeling. It's not a feeling. Feeling and happiness is like the smell of the turkey to your Thanksgiving dinner. It's evidence of the Thanksgiving dinner. Your feelings are evidence of your happiness. Happiness is really a combination of three distinct and separable phenomena: enjoyment with life, satisfaction with life, and meaning in life. And they're not the same. They overlap in some ways, but generally speaking, they're quite separable. And when I meet people who are insufficiently happy, the reason is because they're insufficient in one or more of those areas. These are like the macronutrients of your Thanksgiving dinner: protein, carbohydrates, and fat. To stay alive and be healthy, you need all three in balance and abundance. Similarly, to be happy, you need to enjoy your life, you need to find satisfaction in your life, and most importantly, you need to find deep meaning in life. And so that's what I write about. That's what I do with the CEOs and educators and politicians and leaders that I work with. That's what I write about. And that's what's really a privilege to be thinking about. And that's what's really changed my life. Going from strength to strength, as you probably know, that's from the Psalms. And that's an ancient Judaic blessing. Michael el Chayel, may you go from strength to strength. In your life is the whole idea. The subtitle is what the book is about. Right. So that's why subtitles are getting longer and longer and longer. You see these 1,000-word subtitles, like an abstract of the book underneath, right? But finding success, happiness, and deep purpose. That's the goal. When? In the second half of life. It's happiness, man, for the rest of us. And what this is about is like, yeah, you had a good life. You're having a good life. You're killing it, man. You're a striver. Don't count on that making you happy for the rest of your life, because the likelihood is that the more successful you were before, the more likely you're going to be unhappier later. And that is just the truth. And a lot of people around my age are figuring that out, going, uh-oh, I wrote the book for them. I wrote the book for everybody who's trying to take a bite out of life, but don't know how to go forward. So the first part is you're strong. The promise of this book is more strength. The subtitle is, how are you going to do it? The book started because of my own, once again, I do research on the things that I want the answers to. One of the great things one of the great privileges of being a behavioral scientist is that I've got the toolkit to answer my own questions. The problem is I had been avoiding this particular question, which was I was a CEO in those days. So after I was, quit being a musician, became an academic, got my PhD, taught at a university for 10 years. Then I quit again because back down to the studs. I became the president of a big think tank, like one of the oldest think tanks in the world in Washington, D.C., which was scary and hard and a new beginning because it was, 300 employees and $50 million a year I had to raise, and it was new skills and the whole thing. Anyway, I did it for a decade. But about halfway through, I realized that this was not the be all and end all of my life. On the contrary, the problem with a lot of those jobs is that you do them and do them a little better and then do them again and do them again, but there's no cadence to it. Sooner or later, you're either going to get a nudge or you're going to age out and you're going to have to stop. And then what? Nobody ever gives you a then what, right? And everybody's like, yeah, I talk to these CEOs. They're like, I went from who's who to who's he in 6 months, all those stupid jokes that, former CEOs make. And it's all kind of, about Schmidt, that movie with Jack Nicholson. And furthermore, it's like, for what? I mean, what am I trying to get better at and why? And you have all these questions and all that. And so, I was kind of having an existential crisis. And my wife is finally like, it's like, don't you have a PhD? I mean, don't you do this research for a reason? Answer this question for you and for everybody who's asking this question. People who are trying to work hard in their lives. And again, nobody's playing the violin for me because, oh, poor sad Arthur, who's, had all these good things happen to him in his life. No, I mean, nobody feels sorry for me. But the truth is, I didn't know the path forward. And I saw a lot of people who became incredibly bitter and unhappy at the end of their lives. That came to a head. And that's how I start from strength to strength, is on an airplane one night when I'm overhearing this guy. I can't see, his night. It's dark inside the airplane. I could tell it's an old man by the sound of his voice. And he's telling his wife he might as well be dead. And I'm thinking, oh, poor guy. I mean, obviously he hasn't made very much of his life. And now he's really old and he's disappointed. And he feels like he should have done more with his life. And his wife is like, it's not true that nobody remembers you. She's clearly lying. And I'm thinking, man, I don't want to end up like this. And then at the end of the flight, the lights go on and we all stand up. And I'm kind of curious to get a look. I mean, after all, this is my laboratory, by the way. As a behavioral scientist, my laboratory is overheard conversations. So, anybody who's watching us, if you're behind me in a Starbucks line confessing to somebody that your boyfriend has broken your heart, keep your voice down because it, might be my next book. Anyway, so I stand up, turn around to get a look, and it's one of the most famous men in the world, literally. This is somebody that every person watching us knows. Not personally, they know who he is because he's a hero for the stuff he did in the 60s and 70s. Really, with just a few other people, changed the course of human events. And this is a guy who's confessing to his wife that he might as well be dead. And I'm thinking, man, if it's like this for this guy, either my entire model of what it means to have a successful life and die happy, which is work hard, play by the rules, succeed like crazy, bank it and die. That's either that formula is wrong, either that formula is broken, or this dude is broken. Which is it? And that's what I went back and I told my wife I had this really, kind of a disturbing experience. And she said, there's your book. There's your research. So I did 7 years of research on it. I actually didn't intend to publish it as a book, but by the end I had so much material. And my wife found my notes for my own life, because I keep voluminous notes and spreadsheets on strategy. Again, I've got a 19-dimensional matrix of the parts that will actually lead me to greater happiness and lower my unhappiness in different dimensions. And I score myself consistently and then make strategic plans to get ahead on these metrics. Every 6 months I do this, and it's been tremendously effective. And she's like, you're doing all this careful work. Why don't you share it with somebody? And so I published it. I was like, maybe someone would be interested. Turns out a few people were. And part of the reason is I wrote this for people who are striving to work hard and do well in their lives. And these are the people that have a very hard time recognizing that what used to work isn't going to always work. And so I confront the reader with the absolutely unimpeachable empirical evidence that you don't get the same success curve over the course of your life. What was really, really easy for you and made you a big star at 30 is not going to be what makes you a star at 70. And so I have to give a lot of evidence. I give case studies. I talk about, famous people who died depressed and feeling like charlatans and losers, and are really, really famous for what they did much earlier in their lives. Composers, scientists, And then I go through the data that show that innovation, focus, creativity, the indefatigable energy to solve problems, those abilities, whether you're an electrician or an air traffic controller or a writer or a financial professional or a surgeon or a lawyer, it doesn't matter what you are, that's going to peak in your late 30s or early 40s, and then it's going to decline. That's called fluid intelligence. And I show the research, and I show that the research is not just compelling, it's practically bulletproof, and that you are going to decline earlier than you think. So that's point number one in the roadmap, is facing the truth and don't keep lying to yourself. And if you keep trying to do what you were good at 30, you're going to wind up just like the man on the plane. You're going to wind up frustrated. You're going to wind up angry. You're going to wind up feeling cheated. You're going to wind up lying to yourself and others about your abilities. And that's just no way to live. You'll be unhappy is the bottom line. Then I actually get to the good news, which is there's a second curve, the fluid intelligence curve goes up until about 39, then it comes back down. It's in the cellar by the time you're in your 50s. The good news is there's a second intelligence curve that has other skills that come in behind it, called your crystallized intelligence curve. A lot of this is based on the work of intelligence researcher Raymond Cattell, the British social psychologist who did incredibly important work to understand that, the high dimensionality of human intelligence. And the crystallized intelligence curve increases through your 40s and 50s and 60s and stays high in your 70s and 80s. And as long as you've got your marbles, the crystallized intelligence curve is not based on autonomous innovation. It's not based on working memory, all the stuff that degrades. No. It's based on pattern recognition, teaching ability, the ability to explain things clearly. And the reason is because it goes from raw smarts to wisdom, to all the things, and you can learn rapidly to all the things you already know. What you're good at is going from innovator to instructor, from going from star litigator to managing partner at the law firm, to go from startup entrepreneur to venture capitalist, to go from the star scientist to the distinguished professor. And there are whole fields that reward that. So historians, for example, on average do half of their work after age 65, and it's the better half because it's a pure crystallized intelligence field. So that's the promise. And that's part two, which is you get the second curve. You're going to be super frustrated unless you walk on your second curve. And the rest of the book is how to do that. How do you get on your second curve? The secret to growing happier as you get older is being on your second curve. How do you do it? How do you find it? How do you understand it? How do you walk onto it? How can you do that successfully? Ordinarily, I have an idea what the book title is going to be, and then I write the book and it turns out the title was wrong. Writing with Oprah Winfrey, it's interesting because I had the wrong title and it was screwing up the book. And finally, Oprah calls me and says, we got the wrong title. And then all the pieces fell into place. I mean, she had this she's a very clear thinker. And, she was reading what we were writing and saying, something's wrong. And it turns out the title was wrong. It's a how-to book. It's a manual for building your happiness is what it comes down to. And I was thinking about it in sort of a more holistic kind of woo-woo philosophical. And no, man, it's a practical book, as it turns out, is the way that works. So when I'm titling my books, generally speaking, it changes 5 or 6 times over the course of the life of the book. And part of the reason is because you don't know what your book is about until you're writing it. You don't know what your book is about until it's written, as a matter of fact, because it's a living, kind of breathing, dynamic human process. Well, I didn't know that she was actually a consumer of the research. It turns out that the book wasn't what put me on her radar. It was my column in the Atlantic, in which I write, 1,300 words every Thursday about the science of happiness, like a miniature book. Turns out she was a pretty avid reader of the column all the way through the coronavirus epidemic. I didn't know that. She was passing it around with her friends, et cetera. And so when the book came out, she read the book and then immediately, she called and she says, Oprah Winfrey. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm Batman. It is true. It's disconcerting when it's Oprah Winfrey because she's probably one of the 5 most famous Americans, maybe more. I mean, and furthermore, she's been with me since I was a kid because her career was contemporaneous with my consciousness of what's going on in sort of the entertainment and idea sphere of American life. And she's this, it's interesting because she has had the career endurance that she's had precisely because she's got the depth to endure. I mean, because she's the real deal. This is not an Andy Warhol like 15 minutes of fame figure. On the contrary, she is incredibly high quality, unbelievably smart, deep, empathetic. And in private, by the way, she's the same person. as she appears, which is really extraordinary as well. She's that nice. She's that smart. She's that interesting. She's that, you know what her superpower is? She's interested and curious. That's her superpower, because she draws the absolute best out of other people. She's the ultimate crystallized intelligence. She's living, breathing crystallized intelligence. And so we did her podcast, Super Soul, and then we did, she has a web show called Build the Life You Want. And we're just like a house on fire. I mean, it was like we were, you know, separated at birth or something, except that she did the same questions that I do from one angle, and I did them from a more research-based angle, but we were looking at the same things. We see the world in the same way. And the result is, you know, we were talking on the telephone just about kind of all the stuff that we had going on. She's like, you know, she said, if I still had a show, you know, she says, you know, I had a show, right? It's like, yeah, I know you had a show. I mean, everybody in the world knows that because it was so incredibly influential. It was iconic. And she says, if I still had a show, I would bring you on the show 30 times, but I can't do that because I don't have a show. So why don't we do a book together where we present this stuff for the kind of audience that I ordinarily have? We'll write it together, and it'll be different from, you know, the kinds of audiences that you've had in the past. And we can help a lot of people. The point is, we can lift up a lot of people. We can bring more happiness ideas to people that it has been elusive for. Let's bring this field theory to a lot of other people. And so we wrote it over the past 6 months. And man, it was an incredible experience. It was like life-changing experience, just knowing that. We cooked up the book in its parts at her tea house in Montecito. And, you know, the whole time I was thinking, like, I'm this like small town college professor who fell off the turnip truck in front of Oprah's tea house. You never know where your life is going to take you. That's all I can say. She was creating the frame around the material, saying, this is somebody that I respect and like, and whose work is really interesting, and you need to read and pay attention to. And then she also kept nudging it and shaping it so it was the right tone. It was the right material for a very, very large audience of highly intelligent readers that don't have a background in behavioral science. So that's what she did. She's translating the material, reshaping it. She writes a lot of forwards and intros and comments and notes that say, here's what you're about to see. Here's what you're about to read. And then she read the manuscript, you know, a bunch of times, obviously, as we were working on it, passing things back and forth. And she was reading the science stuff that I was writing. And at certain times she would weigh in and say, like, for example, the title's wrong. We have the wrong title. And I was just struggling at that point because I was trying to fit the work that I was doing to the title that was really clever that we thought we had. And she changed the title and it fell into place. And then the rest of the book flowed out. So I couldn't have written the book in any meaningful way without her frame around it. It was a true collaboration.